I know everything.
I want to make sure that the video works correctly because last night the director didn't know how to manipulate it, and we finally had to have a student from the audience come up and show us how to do it.
All right.
So am I going to do it? I'm going to do it myself?
No, you don't have to do anything. We have the camera up there, and
Right.
we basically record everything up there. We take the sound, it's also up there, so you don't have to worry about it.
Right, but what about moving from one slide to the next?
Then you can just go ahead and use this thing.
Okay, can I try it?
Yeah,
just
sure,
so we
go
know
ahead.
what we're doing? Okay, that's...
There are 4 slides for Professor Falke, and then yours starts.
Oh,
There
okay.
you go. Right?
Okay, good. Yes, this is so good.
So
Yes.
he has 4 slides, and then it's your first.
Yeah.
And for this one, put it around your neck and then basically plug it in here.
Oh, okay.
Because we need this for the audio, for the video recording.
Right. Okay. And now I have we need to leave this up here, right? Do we need to leave this up here
The
when
laptop,
I'm
you mean?
speaking? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we can put it down there if you want to.
Yeah, and I can still use this thing.
Sure, you can move around and walk around if you want to.
Oh, okay. Because I have notes.
Sure. We can put it down here, it's fine.
So if you put it down there,
Sure.
and I can just use this. Okay, that's great.
So this is how you...
Pop, pop.
Older people in a sea of 20-year-old, 20-something reporters. That's the way it is.
Interesting.
Yeah, yeah.
But you're very modern with your digital Hagstrom report, right?
Yes,
That's
it's true. I am. I publish my own daily report on agriculture and food, and I had to start this because the company was reorganized in 2010, and they offered buyouts, or I could stay and take 27 and not necessarily know what I was going to write about. And believe me, eventually they would have laid me off anyway. So I took it and I started my own business, and it's successful. So yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Take your seat.
Later, do you want to have this around your neck or hold it in your hand?
I think I'll put it around my neck.
Okay.
We'll try that. At least.
Okay. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our program on food regulation, food safety in the United States, with comments on attitudes in Europe and Germany. And first of all, I'd like to express my gratitude to you for not having gone to a beer garden at this wonderful day, without thunderstorms. So the thanks go to you first. But I think we will have a very, very interesting, stimulating discussion going on here on food safety issues, which is also part of our lecture series on trade policy that I organized together with my colleague Gianluca Gardini, who is doing the Latin American affairs at our university. The first thing that I want to do, out of kind of necessity, is point to our next lecture, which is going to be in Findelgasse on international trade and sustainability initiatives of European business. And here we also have a really experienced practitioner who's been working for the German and European Trade Association of the Retail Trade. That is, he represented all the big department stores and worked on how sustainability could be incorporated into their businesses. So I just want to point this out. If you find these things interesting, next Tuesday in Findelgasse, come and have a sequel to today's event. Now, coming back to what we are doing here, this is a joint project of my chair, the German-American Institute, and the American Spaces Program at the Deutsch-Amerikanische Center in Stuttgart. And I should tell you a little bit why I came upon this topic. And of course, food safety and food regulation do play an important part in TTIP. But what actually got me to propose this topic to the American Spaces Program and to others is this statistic, which is based on a survey that the Pew Research Center did when they asked Germans what trust they have in European versus American standards. And what you see here, let's leave out auto safety, data privacy, and environmental safety. Let's look at food safety. Germans have no trust in American regulation. So when I saw this, I wondered, can I ever go to the United States again without bringing my own food package, or can I rent a car in the United States? So the idea is to ask, what actually are Americans doing about food safety and food regulation? And my idea was also not just to talk about TTIP, but actually how the American system works. And for this reason, I'm really grateful that we managed to invite Jerry Hagstrom, who currently is the founder and executive editor of the Hagstrom Report. And Jerry, in short, is the premier American journalist on agriculture. He's been covering agriculture for the past 20 years, originally for the National Journal, a major policy publication in the US, and he's been covering not only agriculture, but food issues, food regulation, the organic movement, and all the political conflicts associated with it. So I'd like to give you a very warm welcome to Jerry Hagstrom here in Nuremberg. Now, then I thought we shouldn't really leave the stage to the Americans. So I needed to find a German who would kind of serve as a discussant, so we don't only have kind of a one-sided presentation. And I'm very grateful that Professor Matthias Horst agreed to come to Nuremberg. He has been trained as a lawyer with a degree from Bonn University and PhD from Bochum University, and he's been working most of his professional life for the Association for Food Law and Food Science as an executive secretary, and then later, since 1994, as the primary or main executive director of the Association of the German Food Industry. So you may say he is an industry representative, but he's retired now. He also has been teaching, and he's working for a law firm, so he can look back kind of a little bit of distance how food regulation works in Europe and in Germany. And the way we'll do this here is Jerry Hagstrom will give his presentation. We'll have a comment from our discussant, Professor Horst. Then the three of us will discuss a little bit kind of some of the issues, and then of course we'll open the floor to you all here. Okay, so thank you very much, and the floor now belongs to Jerry Hagstrom.
So now we'll see if I can make the microphone work and the video. I think it's going to stick. Okay. It's kind of strange having a microphone at your throat. So, well, thank you. I am so happy to be here, and like Andreas, I want to thank you for coming to the lecture tonight instead of sitting outside on this beautiful evening. I know if I were you, I would be tempted to enjoy the outdoors. Before I start talking about the subject at hand, I might just tell you a little bit about myself. First of all, I will tell you that I grew up on a farm near Bismarck, North Dakota. And Bismarck was named Bismarck in order to attract German immigrants. My own grandparents were of Swedish and Norwegian heritage, but the community in which I grew up was mostly German. And in fact, all my aunts and uncles married Germans. So all my cousins are half German and half Swedish. But someday, I'm sure when you travel to the United States, you want to go to New York, you want to go to California, you want to go to South Beach in Miami, but you might sometime think about visiting the Midwest and see where all those Germans settled and played such an important role in the development of the United States and still do. I have been a reporter in Washington for many years, and I was for a long time a political reporter. I wrote about polling, and I wrote about political TV commercials and candidates. And then in 1996, the National Journal asked me to cover agriculture because they said, we have to have somebody cover the farm bill, and at least you grew up on a farm. And I have learned that I have an instinct for this, and it's been a very successful part of my career. I really enjoy this, and I write about everything about agriculture, from the farm subsidies to international trade to our nutrition programs that provide food for poor people, to Michelle Obama's kitchen garden at the White House and her campaign against childhood obesity. In fact, if I hadn't been here in Germany yesterday, I would have been in Washington for the latest harvest of Mrs. Obama's garden. Whenever they plant the vegetables in April and they harvest in June, and there are always school kids accompanying her, and it's always interesting to go there and see what she's going to say. And the latest is that she has pledged that she will continue to be interested in food issues and particularly the issue of childhood obesity for the rest of her life. She's never going to give up on this. But our subject today is food safety. And it's very appropriate that we are addressing this topic as the Obama administration is in its last months, because I have spent a lot of my time in the last 7.5 years covering food safety. This has been the most active period in food safety legislation and policy certainly in all my years as a reporter, and a lot of people would say the most active in 70 years. So what I'm going to do tonight is talk to you about what's going on in food safety, but I'm also going to talk about other types of food regulation. And the reason for this is that we recently had a visit from some Italian food safety officials, and during the discussion, people started talking about things like geographical indications and other aspects of food policy. And the man from the Italian government said, well, Europeans look upon food safety as something more than just a question of whether you might eat something that would make you sick. They have a broader definition of what they think of as food safety. Now, I don't know if that's true for you, but I'm going to take that approach this evening and talk about the range of food regulation that has gone on in the last basically in the last 7.5 years. But before I move on, before I start talking about what's going on, I think you need a little historical context. It works. It's always a fear. Modern food safety legislation and concerns in the United States really began in 1906 with the publication of this book, The Jungle by Upton Sinclair. And Upton Sinclair was what we call a muckraking journalist, which meant that muck refers to manure in a barn, and he's digging it up. That's why we call him a muckraker. But the book that he wrote was not a nonfiction book. It was a novel about a Lithuanian immigrant working in a meat plant in the city of Chicago. And the novel really had two themes. One was that the immigrant workers were often exploited because they didn't speak English very well, they were poor, they needed a job, and so therefore the owners of the meatpacking plants could basically get them to do anything at low wages. But the second theme of the book was exposing that some of the meat that was produced was not really healthy. And was actually could make people sick. And this led to a movement to clean up the food supply, and it was particularly taken up by a president named Teddy Roosevelt, whom I'm sure you have heard of, one of our most important progressive politicians from the early 20th century. And so anyway, Sinclair Lewis, it's another writer, Upton Sinclair's book led to the Meat Inspection Act of 1906. And what this did was establish a policy under which the federal government would put meat inspectors in every meat plant in the country every day that the meat plant was open. And the meat, they would look over the operation, examine the meat, and they put a USDA seal on it. And if it doesn't get that seal, it cannot be sold in the grocery stores. And so, for example, if a if a meat plant is found to have some kind of food safety violation, let's say the workers are not washing their hands, or there's something else that's more complicated. For example, if they're trying to slaughter a cow that has been brought to the plant when it's already dead, and sometimes they try to do that kind of thing, the inspector has the authority to shut down the plant until the problem is solved, and then no meat can be processed there and get the seal until the problem has been solved. So that was the system that was set up in 1906. And the system was really based, as it says there, on, well, it doesn't, as it says here, the old system was based on sight, touch, and smell. Now, as the 20th century went on, nutrition scientists and food safety scientists began to develop the idea that there would be other things that could be done to assure meat safety. And in 1993, there was an outbreak of E. coli in a fast food chain called Jack in the Box in Seattle, Washington, and 4 people died, and there were more illnesses. And this was such a dramatic incident that it created the political pressure to do something about this. And at that time, the government then began to impose this program called Hazard Analysis and Critical Control Points, which means that every meat plant has to make a plan in advance. They have to think, what are the hazards that could take place in the processing of this meat? How can we make sure it's clean? How can we make sure there are no feces that come from the animal at the time of slaughter, etc.? And so this system was set up, and it has been in place now since 1996. Now, throughout the Obama period, there have not really been new laws passed about meat inspection, but the Food Safety and Inspection Service, which is in charge of this, has been imposing tighter rules for pathogen reduction during this time. And so this has been going on. The Agriculture Department Food Safety and Inspection Service has also taken over the inspection of catfish, which is a very controversial business because, as I'm going to explain on the next slide, fish have been inspected by a different agency, but Congress ordered them to take over catfish inspection. And the main reason is that we get a lot of catfish from Vietnam, and there's a competition between the Vietnamese suppliers and the American suppliers. The Vietnamese government says that moving this system to the Agriculture Department is just a form of protectionism. But the thing is that when USDA does its inspections, it does them more frequently than the other agency. And in the first shipments that it inspected after it took over this program, it found chemicals in both of them that were illegal in the United States. But whether we keep this is uncertain because the Vietnamese are threatening to take the U.S. to the World Trade Organization over this issue. Now, in the same period that the Meat Inspection Act was passed, another bill was passed, the Food and Drugs Act of 1906, and that established the regulation of food and drugs. But it was everything except meat and poultry, which was in the hands of the Agriculture Department. And so this other agency was eventually set up called the Food and Drug Administration, and it is in charge of everything from fruits and every other type of food, including fruits and vegetables and fish. Those are the 2 biggest examples that I can give you. And so that system was different, however, from the system for meat and poultry because the system was not set up to inspect every day in every place where they were growing vegetables or where they were processing fish. There was an assumption that everything would be safe unless there was a problem, and the agency would deal with the problems when they occurred. So it was a system in which you are dealing with contamination rather than prevention. Well, in 2011, You know, this is short. You know, Obama came to power in 2009, and this was the subject of a great deal of debate. And what had happened is that there were growing problems with food contamination in vegetables. And this is a bigger concern because the government and the nutritionists are encouraging people to eat more vegetables. But there had been contamination of vegetables, and so actually the fruit and vegetable industry decided there needed to be more government inspection. And so they pushed for this new bill, which is called the Food Safety Modernization Act, which is, as the government says, the most sweeping reform of food safety laws in more than 70 years. And that law was passed. Now, actually, after it was passed, the industry decided it was too strict, and they've been trying to get the government to soften some of the provisions in it. But it basically set up this HACCP system for fruits and vegetables, and the people who produce these products, once again, have to have a program in advance to look for the potential hazards in any food, and then to have a plan for trying to avoid the hazards. Now, under this FSMA, as we call it, there are 7 rules. And they're all pretty common sense things as to where the problems can occur. You know, they can occur in feed when animals are fed, or they can occur in transportation, etc. But you might be interested in rule number 6, which is the Foreign Supplier Verification Program. And for anybody who's going to export to the United States, they will have to follow pretty much the same standards as the United States. And we've never had such strict rules on this before. And the way that the government is going to enforce this is that they are going to hold the importers, the Americans who import the food, they're going to hold them responsible for the inspection and the verification. And then number 7 there is accredited third-party certification final rule. There is no way the U.S. government can have the employees to do all of this inspection. And so they are certifying what we call third parties, which basically would be companies around the world and also in the United States to help the food companies and food producers with the inspection, but they will have to be certified by the Food and Drug Administration in order to do this work. The FDA wants to make sure they know what they're doing. Now, switching from actual food safety to other issues of food regulation that go on in the U.S. government, I'm now going to talk a little bit about the nutrition facts label. And I have Mrs. Obama's picture there, because one of the most important things that's happened during the administration is that they have also updated the nutrition facts label. And for any of you who have been in the U.S., or if you buy a U.S. product that's sold in Germany probably, you see this nutrition facts label, which tells you what is in the processed food product that you are buying. And there have been campaigns from the nutritionists for some time to try to tell people more that they need to know about what they're eating. There's a lot of concern, as you know, that we eat too much sugar, that we weigh too much. And so the administration has updated the label, and you can see the differences there. Oh, I can? But I don't know where the... Oh, okay. The red thing. All right. So you can... let's see. There we go. Yeah. Okay, there you can see the calorie count will be bigger in the new one. That's one important thing. And then the other is that we're going to include added sugars. This has been very controversial, particularly with the sugar industry, as you could imagine. And so when you have total sugars, that would include such things as if you eat an apple pie, there would of course be natural sugar in the apples that are in the pie, but sugar would be added. And this is to alert people that you're eating all of this. And then the other difference that you see here with sugars is on this side, it does not tell you a daily recommended amount. This is a percentage of this particular nutrient that you should be eating every day. But now they will tell us, you know, if you ate a serving of this, you'd get 20% of the sugar you needed out of one, out of one serving. And then we've also added, Americans need to get more iron. That's there. But no, they need more potassium. And so they're trying to encourage people now to eat more products that have potassium in them. So that is the change to the nutrition facts label, which just came out a very few weeks ago. Uh-oh, what do I do now? Okay, I think that's, let me just make sure I'm in the right one. Okay, yes. Okay, the other things that have gone, that we've also had two other forms of labeling established while President Obama has been in power. One has been country of origin labeling for the products that you see listed up there. And I think it's important to point out that we started out also having labeling for beef and pork. But we had to stop that because the World Trade Organization ruled that the U.S. slaughterhouses were discriminating against Canadian and Mexican cattle and pigs. And I think that deserves just a little bit of explanation. It's kind of an oddity, but the meat industry thinks of the entire North American continent as one place: Canada, the United States, and Mexico. But there are a lot of animals that are raised in Canada and raised in Mexico, but they're brought across the border into the United States for slaughter. And when we had country of origin labeling for beef and pork, the slaughterhouses began to say they would only process animals from one of those countries one day a week. And then they wanted to pay less money for them because it caused them more work. And this is the case that that Canada and Mexico took to the WTO, and they won. They said it was discriminatory, and so the U.S. Congress had to repeal that law. But on all the other products, actually, the U.S. producers asked for the law because they want the American people to be informed of when they're eating American products, and they think that from a marketing standpoint, Americans are more likely to buy American food than to buy foreign food. The second one here is menu labeling. And that was part of the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare, which you may have heard of, which is the first law that has brought nearly universal health care to Americans. But part of the concern in writing the Obamacare law was that we were afraid of increased health care costs, and one of the ways that you try to control health care costs is by keeping people healthy. And Americans eat so much food in restaurants and in other places these days that they included menu labeling. And it doesn't cover just restaurants, but it will also cover movie theaters and bowling alleys and any place that serves ready-to-eat food. And they included alcoholic beverages. So if you now, in the United States, if you go to a movie theater and you want to order a beer to go with your movie, the menu board will actually tell you how many calories are in each brand of beer. The same thing if you go into a Marriott hotel bar. Any place, any company that's a chain has to do this. Now, if you find some little hole in the wall somewhere, or some foodie bar or whatever, it's only operated in one place, they don't have to do it because it would just be too too complicated. But I was surprised. Last December, I was in San Francisco for New Year's, and I went with some friends to the movies, and there it told you. And you know, it's very interesting to find out how many calories are in a daiquiri compared with a martini, or a light beer versus a full, more traditional beer. Okay. The very latest thing that the Food and Drug Administration has announced is voluntary salt reduction targets. This is because there is a concern that Americans are eating too much salt, and it leads to hypertension, heart attacks, and also to strokes. And what the FDA says is that most of this salt is in prepared foods and in restaurant foods. And they are putting out these targets and urging the companies to reduce the level of sodium that is in these foods. And they focused on that rather than, for example, you know, if you prepare a steak at home and you put salt on it, you can control that as the consumer. You know what you're doing there. But if you go to a restaurant, you don't know how much salt has been put on before the food comes to you. Or if you buy a can of soup, you can't take the salt out. There's no way to do that. And so that's why it's focused in this way. This is the food companies. The food companies are adjusting to it. Some of them, Mars and Nestle, have said they're going to comply with this. They're going to try to work with this. The targets are voluntary because think of all the foods in the grocery store and think of trying to reduce the salt in each one of them and still make it tasty and safe. That's a hard thing to do. So the companies are going to have to experiment with this. So the FDA did not do mandatory targets. Now, some of the nutrition activists wanted them to do mandatory targets. But if you think of how many, the thousands of products there are in stores, it would be pretty hard for a government agency to say a can of chicken soup can only have this much salt, or a cereal, or anything that you can think of. One of the things I find so interesting about this is that the spice companies are now doing research on what kinds of spices that you can use in food to make it tasty and yet not have so much salt in it. So that's sort of a new industry, actually, in the US. Now, here we come to one of the testiest issues between Americans and Europeans. Genetic modification. Genetic modification in terms of the development of seeds and also now of animals is under the control of several agencies that have different roles to play. But the final decision on whether a food with genetically modified ingredients is safe or not rests with the Food and Drug Administration. And their scientists have determined that genetic modification is safe, and that the products are not that different from non-genetically modified products, so that they do not need to be labeled. Now, this is a scientific decision as opposed to a societal decision. So the Food and Drug Administration only has the authority to label based on science, but the state governments are not restricted in that way. If they want to impose a label on something, they can do it. And the state of Vermont has passed a law that says everything with genetically modified ingredients, and that's basically corn and soybeans, because those are the two main products, is going to have to be labeled starting the 1st of July. And while you may look upon the United States as a monolith that accepts GMOs, that's not really true in the US. We have, and I'm going to talk more about organic foods, but we have a lot of debate. And that's one of the points I want to make tonight, is we are having big debates about food in the United States. It's a very, very big topic. And so anyway, but the farmers and the seed companies and the food companies really don't want to label for genetic modification because they think that the consumers will reject the product. We're not sure about that. Campbell's Soup has already voluntarily labeled They said they brought out a product in Australia a few years ago that included genetically modified soybeans, and they labeled, and the consumers accepted it right away. They had no problems with it. And so, and Mars Candies is now labeling that their products are made partially with genetically engineered ingredients. And so this is a debate that's in motion at this moment. Congress is trying to pass a bill by July 1st that would set up a federal labeling standard. The big concern is that different states are going to set up different standards, which will make it very complicated for the food companies to try to deal with this. But the basic debate is, should the labeling be voluntary or mandatory? Should it be on the package or on a smart label or on the company's website? Those are the issues that they are grappling with. And so far, they have not come up with a bill that can get through the United States Senate. So we'll have to see, unless they do it in the next couple of weeks, they will have to start, the products that appear in Vermont on July 1st will have to be labeled. Of course, what people are already saying is the companies have already shipped labeled products to Vermont, because you can't just products are shipped usually 6 weeks before they're sold in the stores. So in effect, labeling already exists. But whether it goes nationwide, we don't know yet. Now, to switch to the opposite of genetic modification, to organic standards. We've had a lot of interest in organic foods in the United States, but people want to be sure if something is organic. So in 1990, Congress passed the Organic Standards, the Organic Food Production Act, and it has set up a system of organic standards and also this USDA organic seal. And the division of the Agriculture Department called the Agricultural Marketing Service is in charge of this. The certification is by these third-party certifiers, but they do go out and visit farms and see how food is being raised. You can't use any synthetic fertilizers and other inputs if you're producing organic food. The view in the United States is definitely that organic food is not any safer than conventional food. It's a matter of marketing and personal preference. I think that when people prefer organic food, it's usually because they think the taste is better, they think it's fresher, maybe it's more likely to be locally produced. The debate about organic and organic food standards is kind of endless, because there are conflicts within the organic community about whether or not, about what the standards should be. For example, at the moment we're having a debate, do organic chickens have to be raised outdoors? The government is considering a regulation that says they would have to be raised outdoors. But what if you have a problem with what we call avian flu? Then if you bring if those chickens are raised indoors, then are they not organic, even though they're eating organic feed? And everything else about it, the raising is organic, and so there's a debate within the organic industry about this, but the important thing is that the interest in organic foods is so great that organic foods have gone from being 1% of the food supply a few years ago to 5% today. So it is definitely a growth area in American agriculture. Also, we have an equivalency agreement with the European Union and Canada and some other countries so that organic food can be traded back and forth. The idea is that the organic standards are acceptable in these several countries and that the food can move around without any additional regulation. Now, I put this in here because this has been a key initiative of the Obama administration. The Obama administration has tried to help small local farmers. Farmers markets are very popular in the United States today. But they've had lots of problems in the sense that the people who run them are not always so skilled at business. It's hard to what we call aggregate, which means bring together all the production. And so this Know Your Farmer, Know Your Food initiative has been encouraging the consumer to go to the farmer's market, get to know the guy who sells you the apples, or the guy who produces the most likely organic lamb or whatever it is, to increase the connection between the urban consumer and the farmer. There's a lot of talk in the United States today about the fact that 50 years ago, most Americans were just one generation off the farm. But today they're 2 or 3 generations off the farm. And they don't know much about farming production. They're very removed from it. And this is one way to help them. The government has always also subsidized what we call mobile slaughterhouses, because some of these are small producers, and so they have gotten slaughterhouses that I guess go from farm to farm, slaughtering animals. And that's because for these small producers, the big slaughterhouses don't want to deal with them because their production is too small. So this has been a very important movement. Now, Know Your Farmer, Know Your Food, and local production are not the same as organic. And you have sometimes conflict within these communities. As does the consumer care more about whether it's local or whether it's organic? And if it's organic and it's grown in Argentina, will the consumer accept that as okay, or do they think organic food should not be transported long distances? Because the organic standards do not say that the food has to be grown within a certain area. It's only that it has to be raised under certain conditions. I just wanted to point out to you that in the United States, alcohol and tobacco are not regulated in the Agriculture Department, but in the Treasury Department. And that's because the view of the US government has mainly been that this is a way to raise tax money. You go back to 1791, people have always been willing to pay for alcohol and tobacco, and no matter what the price was, it seems, and so they imposed taxes at that time, and the regulation remains there. This is important, connected to the fact that trademarks and to the degree that we deal with geographical indications, that is handled also through the US Patent and Trademark Office. And of course, this issue of geographical indications is a very big one in these TTIP negotiations. The Europeans are insisting that the United States has to accept geographical indications for things like wine and also for a certain number of cheeses. And the US dairy industry is resisting this because they say the European immigrants brought these cheeses to the United States when they came 100 years ago. We've been producing them for years. There's no reason why you should go back so that you could only call this a certain cheese if it comes from Europe. On the wine, we already do have an agreement that is doing pretty well, and it, for example, is mostly, this affects the word champagne, for example, which can be used in California and New York if you call it New York champagne or you call it California champagne, but the other states are not using it. There, for example, if you buy a product from New Mexico called Gruet, which is a very fine, but it is called sparkling wine. It is not called champagne. We have wine production spreading all over the United States, but they're having to use sparkling wine rather than champagne on these labels. And here we have another thing which affects food in the United States, the dietary guidelines. Every 5 years, trying to use the latest science, the American government updates what are called the dietary guidelines, and this is what they believe this is to guide the American people in what they should consume. And this is tied into those nutrition facts labels. These are guidelines for how much meat you should eat every day, how much you should eat in carbohydrates, what amount of sugar consumption you should have, how alcohol affects, not how it affects you, but some guidelines on really on how much you should drink and eat in every way. Now, in the last debate over these dietary guidelines, an academic panel of advisors suggested that Americans should consider sustainability when they decide what to eat. Sustainability is, of course, a very vague term. It can mean many, many different things. Ultimately, the government officials in charge of this rejected the inclusion of sustainability in the dietary guidelines. But they will be rewritten in another 5 years, and maybe in another 5 years there will be better science to talk about this, or maybe there won't be. The whole idea is that people should be thinking about things like, what is the impact of meat production on the air and on the planet? Should people reduce their meat consumption in order to try to make a more sustainable world? These are questions that have not really been answered in a serious fashion yet. So I wanted to show you that we have a lot of watchdog groups. We not only have industry groups, this is a list of various nonprofit organizations, NGOs you might call them, that are constantly monitoring what is going on in the food debate in the United States. And I'm only going to point out one, the bottom one here on the right-hand side, the Humane Society of the United States, because it has done something unique, which I think plays a big role in all of our food regulation today. And that is, the Humane Society is very concerned with animal welfare. But instead of trying to go through the government to get higher standards for the conditions of raising animals, the Humane Society has gone to the food processors and the retailers and the restaurant chains and said, you should, for example, buy eggs only from cage-free chickens. Or you should buy pork only from companies that refuse to use what are called gestation crates, which are rather small crates in which they put a pig that is about to give birth, and they do that so that the pig will not sort of move around or get into a fight with another pig and perhaps lose the piglets. And they have been very successful. The companies are afraid, not exactly of a boycott, but of bad publicity. And so the companies are putting pressure on the commodity producers to comply with these rules. Now the commodity producers, the people who raise the pigs, the people who raise the chickens and provide the eggs, they're not particularly happy about this because it increases their costs. But how do you say no to your customer? And so they're trying to adjust to this. And the reason why I bring this up as a special case is that if the Humane Society tried to go through the government to get these regulations changed, most likely the producers would go to Congress and get them to try to stop the executive branch. And for those of you who are studying American government, you know we have a big split between, it's an intentional split, a separation of powers between Congress and the executive branch. But Congress can pass a law telling the executive branch, don't do this. And so that is what has happened in the past when they've tried to do some of these things through the government. But this has turned out to be a very powerful tool, and it really makes people, it really makes the commodity producers very upset because they don't know how to deal with it except to try to comply. They have tried going to the consumers, but it's not very popular to say to the consumer, oh, you really should buy those eggs from those chickens in those little tiny cages. I mean, the consumers just don't accept this idea. So they pretty much have to go along with it when the issue is raised. So here's just a summary of some of the things that are coming up in the future here. Will we continue catfish regulation, which I have, I think you can see it anyway. What's going to happen with GMO labeling? We have a debate about whether we should have a single food safety agency. Some people think the current system of separating meat and poultry from the others is inefficient, that there are problems in communication. But most of the former government officials say that setting up a single food safety agency would take so much time and energy, you're better off focusing on the problems rather than anything else. We have this Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is under consideration at the moment. You know, the 12 countries have agreed to it, but Congress would have to approve it for the United States to participate. The U.S. agriculture industry is very enthusiastic about this. The opposition to the TPP in the United States comes from other quarters, from some parts of the auto industry, for example, because there are people who are afraid of more high-paying, unionized manufacturing jobs moving to Asia. And then there are people who have other objections, but there aren't many from agriculture, and there aren't really many fears about this. And of course also the TTIP. I will mention one other issue that I haven't put up here that is a current issue in the U.S., and that is resistance to antibiotics. There is a lot of concern in the U.S. about the resistance of antibiotics in human medicine, that people go to the doctor, they are given an antibiotic, it no longer works, and the theory is that they have become resistant because the antibiotics are also fed to animals. They've fed as growth promoters, they've been fed to prevent illness as well as to treat illness, and there have been residues of this that get into the meat and that people have consumed it. The FDA is asking all the meat companies not to use antibiotics for growth promotion anymore, and so the process of reducing the use of antibiotics in meat animals has started, but it is just going on slowly, and we'll have to see what happens with that in the coming years. So now we get to just the ending here, in which I'm going to talk about the present and the future. This is a picture of President Obama signing the Food Safety Modernization Act. I think that it would be very hard to point to any administration in recent decades that has done as much on food safety and on food regulation as the Obama administration. This has really been a remarkable period. The question is, what's next? So, here we have our two leading presidential candidates. And Donald Trump, as you can see there, is eating at McDonald's. And the interesting thing is that he says he eats at McDonald's and other fast food places because he likes the cleanliness. And on that point, he is right. The fast food places are very clean. They are terrified of a food safety problem, because if you have establishments in every state and around the world and you get bad publicity from a food safety problem, it can really ruin your business. And so he's right. It's rare to have a food safety problem in a place like McDonald's. Of course, then you have the question about the quality of the food. There are people who really wonder if Donald Trump eats that kind of food all the time. It's completely out of character for the kind of golden palaces in which he lives. But hey, that's what he says. And on the campaign trail, especially, I think when he's trying to appeal to working class people, he's eating the same kinds of things that they do. Now, on the other side, we have Hillary Clinton. Now, Hillary Clinton, when she eats fast food, goes to a place called Chipotle. And Chipotle is a chain of Mexican fast food that's more expensive, but it also guarantees you won't get any genetically modified ingredients, and it tries to buy as much as it can locally. But Chipotle has run into some food safety problems, and some people think part of that is because it is buying locally, which means it buys from many more suppliers than if it bought from a few national producers of the, let's say, the ingredients for their vet salads and things. And it's currently trying to clean up its act, but the important thing about Hillary is that she says she eats a jalapeno pepper every day in order to stay healthy, and this keeps her going on the campaign trail. And she also likes this particular hot sauce called Ninja Squirrel. And the reason why reporters are interested in this is that it's so hard to figure out what these people think about food. Food and agriculture are not high-profile issues on the campaign trail. The people who work in food and agriculture would like to make them that way, but when you look at what we're debating in the United States today, things like immigration and trade, etc., it's hard to make food and agriculture a top issue. But here's what I think is the real future. If anybody thinks that these issues are going to go away, think about these people who are close to the candidates. Bill Clinton used to be known for going jogging and then stopping at a fast food joint on the way, or on the way home. But he has since then had open heart surgery, has become very concerned about his health. He became a vegan, although now he has added salmon and eggs to his diet because his doctors were saying he wasn't getting enough protein. And so I believe that if Hillary's in the White House, he will be an important advisor. There's no question. And the second one is Ivanka Trump, the daughter. Just looking at her, you would have to think she does watch what she eats. But even more importantly, in an interview, the only thing that she says she would change about her father is that she wants him to eat healthier, and she wants him to eat slower. So whoever is next in the White House, I believe that the issues of food safety and food regulation in general will continue to be hot items, and I also think that the American consumers will be insisting on it. So with that, I thank you. Okay? Yeah.
Thank you, Jerry. And now I think we got the idea that it's a vibrant scene in the United States. Interesting, the question now is everything well from our point of view? How do we look upon what we see in the United States? And this question will be answered by Professor Horst. The floor is yours.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, thank you very much. Just some small remarks. First of all, when I saw the results of the survey you started with, that is a typical result of the contradiction between facts and the perception of facts. And I think if we would stick to the facts, then they are there's, from my point of view, the same level of safety, of course, in the US as in Europe and as in Germany as well. There are differences in some specific aspects, but by and large, there is, from my point of view, and I would like to start with this comment, there is no substantial difference. Second remark is, if I recollect what you have said, there are and there were quite similar issues here in Europe and in Germany. Question of food safety, of course, question of obesity, nutrition, GMOs, organic products, regional versus global, tobacco, etc., etc. And I would like to come later in the discussion on some specific points. But what I think is important to start with is that we have to be clear about the definitions, what we are talking about. Since, as you concluded your presentation with that it will be a hot issue in the political arena in the US, also in the future, and it always has been a hot issue here in Germany, especially in Germany, but also in other countries of the European Union. It is an attractive issue for political profiling, especially here in this country. And of course, it is an attractive playing field for NGOs like Greenpeace, or here in Germany, Food Watch, and you mentioned other NGOs. And since it has a high political value or importance, we must be clear what we are talking about. If we're talking about food safety, then we have to stick to the product. The product must be safe. The product or the regulation or the policy has the objective to prevent people from becoming ill when eating a specific foodstuff. The foodstuff must be safe. And on the other hand, if you're talking about about preventing harm to our health, on the other hand, there is the issue of nutrition, of consumption. On the one hand, we have the product, which has to be safe. Let me say, only safe food additives are allowed to be used, or the maximum residues of pesticides have to be obeyed too. But the other and more important question is how our society will stay in a healthy condition. And that brings me to the issue of obesity. We have a real problem, not only in the US, but also in the EU, and especially also in the developing countries, of a growing obesity of the population, especially if you look at the children and young people. But this is another issue. It has nothing to do with safe food. The product has to be safe, but even if a product is safe, you can do a lot of harm to your health if you behave in an unreasonable way. If you eat too much fatty products, or if you drink too much beer. And we all know it is a difficult issue. Since it is up to your personal habits and up to your personal way of life. But of course, we have to take it very, very serious in our societies, and there's a demand of resolving this problem. Of course, a political demand, a scientific demand, a demand of the society, but it needs to have other solutions. If you talk about safe food, we have to stick, as I said, and I want to repeat it, we have to stick to the product. And we have regulations dealing with the product, hygienic regulation, etc., etc. But if we are talking about the individual consumption, we have to talk about other tools to get our population, to get our society, to bring our society to a better situation, if I may say. So there are different answers needed for this growing problem. And I think I would like to finalize my initial remarks with that. It is necessary to have clear definitions. We must know, we must be clear what we are talking about. On the one hand, food safety. On the other hand, the question of reasonable consumption, of preventing diseases which are linked to obesity, etc., etc. Thank you for this first opportunity to make some remarks.
Okay, we'll now all join together and sit there and maybe have 2 or 3 issues that we may want to discuss, and I will kind of take the first, the privilege of the chair, so to speak, to do the first question. If we look at this debate today, the question is, aren't we kind of sitting in the same boat, and aren't we both pulling in the same direction? So why is it so difficult to reach agreement, for instance, in a trade agreement on food regulation? Who wants to go with this? Start.
Well, when I look at what's going on in the TTIP negotiations, and I listened to American industry, and we also saw in the U.S. this leaked document from the EU negotiators summarizing what the problems are. I think it's really still a business matter in which the Europeans are resisting bringing in genetically modified seeds and also meats that have been prepared in certain ways. And on the American side, the big issue is this geographical indicators, because our dairy industry, our cheesemakers are bitterly opposed to these geographical indications that the Europeans want to, the American phrase is claw back. They want to claw back the names and say that, these cheeses can only have this name if they come from Europe. And that, it seems to me often that in agriculture, people are more worried about what they would lose from this agreement than what they would gain, even though there are other things that they could, in which you could have an increase in trade, for example, from lower tariffs. There is talk about aspects of the agreement that would make it easier for people to invest in the food industry on both sides of the Atlantic. I have heard, for example, that there are French food manufacturers that would dearly love to set up operations in the United States because they think they produce higher quality TV dinners than we have in the US. Or what, I don't know if you still call them TV dinners, but that's what we call them.
Well, I think it's a question of perception, is a question of historical experience, and we are here in Europe, we are very reluctant to new ways of processing since we have, or we are convinced that of course we have the best food here in Europe, full stop. On the other hand, as I said when I started with my first remark, I'm convinced that the food is as safe in the US as it is here in Europe, and vice versa. That's no way. But it is a political issue. If I take your both examples, GMOs. If I understood you correctly, in the US there's now starting a discussion on the labeling of GMO products in various states. And here in Europe, and especially in Germany, we are far beyond the issue of labeling. We want to get rid of this terrible thing, of these terrible products, GMOs, etc. But we are not honest, since of course we have a lot of foodstuffs here which in their processing way were impacted by the GMOs, which GMOs, from the raw material, etc., coming from animal feed, of course. We in Europe, we cannot feed our animals without the imported soybeans, without the maize, the corns, etc., etc. That's absolutely, we must be honest, and we are living in a global world, and we are depending on a global supply of feedstuff, and therefore we have to be honest. And therefore we had the discussion, and we still have it on the one hand, that meat products should be labeled if the animals were fed with these kind of feedstuff coming from abroad, not only from the US but also from South America, as we know. But until now, there was absolutely no majority at the European level to introduce such a labeling system, since these kind of regulations fall in the competence of the EU and not of the national legislator anymore. And the other example is the application of hormones in the beef production in the US. From my point of view, it is also a question of tradition. We here in Europe, we have a very, let me say, bad feeling if we are talking about hormones in beef, etc., etc. But I think it's not a question of safety. It's a political issue. We just don't want to have it. Full stop. And in the context of TTIP, from my point of view, the only way out is to introduce labeling requirements for these kind of products. Then the individual consumer or the retailers or the importers can decide, do we want to put these things on the market here in Europe, or do I want to eat these kind of products, full stop? And that's up to the consumer.
I think this is a pretty good statement to start the discussion and kind of throw the ball to you. So, solution is we label it, and this way we reestablish consumer sovereignty. You can decide, if there's GMO in it or if it's hormone treated. If it's clearly labeled, then the market, you as a consumer, can decide. Of course, one position that one can, I think, rationally take. So, questions? Unfortunately, we only have one microphone.
Well, as you said, like American dairy products, like especially like Wisconsin and Minnesota as the dairy producers, basically, they want to produce products that are originating from Europe, as with the argument of saying that most of the inhabitants are actually originating from Europe, especially. Why is actually labeling them as American, so to say, copies of the product a problem to the industry?
Yes, theoretically, at least your question is being heard all over the world. All of these products, if they are produced in the United States, they say produced in the United States. It's not a lie on the package. They just don't. They just still want to be able to use the the European name of the cheese, the Europeans don't want that. They say it should be used only if it's produced in that particular place, and that this has marketing value. The Europeans would also say, the American products are often not the same quality, and that they're bland. They're not as carefully made. That's up to, but that's up to the consumer, really. I think, but that's the European argument. By the way, in case you're not aware of this, the United States imports a lot of European food, especially the high-quality products, the high-quality wines, the high-quality cheeses. I'm not sure what the other major exports are, but we have a big trade deficit with Europe. You sell much more to us than we sell to you, and you sell us high-value products, and we sell you more commodities, especially things like corn and soybean feed and things like that. So that's the basic argument that surrounds all of this.
It's a different philosophy. Here in Europe, we have a strict regime of the protection of geographical indications, like Parma ham, or like the Nürnberger Rostbratwürstchen, which is also protected. You are only allowed to produce them here in Nürnberg and in the region around, but you are not allowed to produce these original ones in Munich, for example. And therefore, it is not acceptable for this industry, this European industry, that, for example, in the US, Gouda cheese would be produced and sold under this name. And you said you mentioned the example of Californian champagne. This is an absolute sin.
Yeah,
in your.
But the Europeans have agreed to that.
But I'm quite astonished. I didn't know that. But here in Europe, the French are very, very strict. We are not even allowed to indicate or to use the indication méthode champenoise for a German sparkling wine. That's absolutely forbidden. So I think this is a main issue. Has nothing to do with food safety, not at all. It's a question of economical interest, economical value, and I don't know how this can be solved.
Yeah, I think there was another issue with the TTIP that you haven't talked about yet. That was with lawsuits that might come up against countries if they were to ban a certain product. Let's say now they allow it, and in 5 or 10 years they want to ban it, and that the companies could sue the country for the loss that they would make.
I really don't know this issue very well, but to the degree that I know it, this is a larger issue. It isn't mainly an agricultural issue. But yes, there are concerns about countries and legal sovereignty and companies being able to sue governments over regulations, also environmental regulations, I think. But I really can't speak more to those issues because I don't cover the whole trade field generally.
No, the same with me. It's a general issue and not only focused on the agricultural food issue. So I'm not an expert on this.
I mean, I can say the following. It's basically investor protection. And what we'll probably see is that the right to regulate will be safeguarded, that this will not be weakened. And also, I don't think we're going to have these private tribunals. If we get something like this, we will have a court system. More. Now you all feel American food is safe to eat? Gianluca.
Thank you. I was wondering if you could comment a little bit on the precautionary principle, which actually inspires the EU approach not only to food safety, but also to food taste. So the whole discussion about protected designation of origin, typical geographical indication are also about identity, social policy, and territorial development policy, not only about trade or food safety. So if you could comment a little bit on the precautionary principle in terms of food safety, but also on food and identity, if you so wish. Thank you.
Can I add to this? Is this identity problem also an issue in the United States? That food from a certain region is important to the producers and the consumers?
Well, I would say that food being locally produced is increasingly important to the consumers. Every city now has restaurants that are claiming that the food they're serving is locally produced. Now, when you actually start to quiz the waiter or whoever about what do we mean by local, you have big problems there because there are no standards for this. The federal government actually has several different standards for what's local and what's regional depending on the program that you're talking about. Sometimes it's 50 miles, sometimes it's 200 miles away. And in some states, if you were to if you take a state like North Dakota where I grew up, you have to make it a pretty wide area because there are so few people. There wouldn't be enough people to consume locally produced food in the middle of the state. You know, you have to have a pretty broad swath on that. The thing is that we don't have legal standards about this. We do have a small movement in the United States in favor of geographical indications for things like Maine potatoes, Idaho potatoes, certain cheeses in Vermont. But it is a very small movement. I don't think I said in the lecture, of course, we have a trademark system in which a food can be trademarked, and certain cheeses have been trademarked. But the difference between a trademark and a geographical indicator is that trademark will, I suppose, trademark the recipe, but it doesn't indicate the place of production. So you can produce it anywhere and still use the trademark. You can also sell the trademark from one company to another, and geographical indicator stays with the local community, and it cannot be sold. So you can't suddenly take the word Parma ham and sell it to the Australians, which you could do with a trademark. So that is a big difference. On the precautionary principle, I can't really speak to this from a legal standpoint, but I would say that in general, Americans reject the precautionary principle because we're not cautious. We're more enthusiastic about trying the new. And so the Americans view the precautionary principle as we're not scared of the future. We're more enthusiastic about what new thing could happen. Now, of course, there are people who, there are Americans who believe in the precautionary principle who are, in fact, if you look at, there are some authors, I think it's Michael Pollan, who says he doesn't want to eat any food that his grandmother didn't eat. Well, when he says that, there are people who say, but I want to eat sushi and my grandmother didn't eat sushi. And so if you actually look at in the food area, if you look at all this fusion cooking and all of that, that would definitely be in opposition to something like the precautionary principle. Although really, you talk about the precautionary principle, and it's mostly a matter of food safety, or not just food safety, but safety in general.
Well, perhaps some additional remarks to the issue of regional on the one hand and geographical indications. We must differentiate it very clearly. Regional means, 50 kilometers or 20 kilometers. There's no definition, of course, but the expectation is that there is no large there's no long transportation, for example, for the raw material, etc. On the other hand, protected geographical indications has nothing to do with regional. It only indicates that a product comes from a specific place according to specific recipe. For example, the sausages here, the famous Nürnberg sausages, they have to be produced here and according to a specific recipe, but we all know the meat comes from Denmark, comes from Holland, comes from any other part of the European Union, etc., etc. The same is with the famous Black Forest bacon, of course. This has led to another discussion here in Europe. Do we need a mandatory labeling where the raw material comes from? And well, of course, you can establish a mandatory labeling, but this would lead to some other problems. If you want to produce the sausages and you need raw materials, the one day it comes from Holland, the next day it comes from Denmark, so you have to change your labeling every day. You must realize that. You can do everything, but this again is very costly. As far as the precautionary principle is concerned, you outlined that let me say, the attitude in the US is different to the attitude, especially here in Germany. We are very cautious, sometimes a bit too cautious from my point of view, but the principle is an integral part of the European legislation. You can find it there, the precautionary principle. It is laid down in the legislation.
Okay, we're coming to the end, but you know, kind of privilege of the chair is to kind of ask the final question. And actually, I want to ask Jerry Hagstrom, since he covered campaigns and election, who is going to win on November 8th? One. And when is Hillary Clinton going to serve the first vegan state dinner? And for which foreign dignitary?
Well, I guess Andreas already thinks he knows who's going to win. As to who would win on November 8th, I have been working in this field long enough to know better than to make a prediction. I certainly did not think that Donald Trump would be getting the nomination for president. At the present time, the things that he is saying to me are to me so outrageous that I don't think he can win. But you know, we are months away from the election, and we'll just have to see. We'll just have to see about that. Now, when you bring up the idea of a vegan state dinner, the first thing I will note is that the Obamas have most of their state dinners, they have served steak, beef steak. They did a dinner, I think their dinner for the Indian leader was vegetarian. I'm not sure about that, but I think it was, because at the time it was said that they didn't serve steak to him. And they did for the Canadian Prime Minister, they served lamb. So vegan is quite a stretch. I don't know whether you could get to that point. Maybe if Bill Clinton's there, he'll have to have a special meal, just like on the airline. I don't know. I want to bring up one aspect of American policy making that I could have mentioned before when we were talking about interest groups. We have a phenomenon in the United States that has become uncontrollable, and that is bloggers. Nobody knows what to do about this, about the food bloggers. And they are out there, particularly the mommy bloggers, who are talking about what their kids are served in school and what you should serve your child. But they are a part of a phenomenon in this whole field of policy making that people are trying to adjust to, and that is that people your age, but also older than you are, have lost trust in experts, and they only trust people that they believe share their values. And so the bloggers blog, and they take positions. Sometimes if they do not have scientific expertise, they take a position, and thousands and even millions of people around the country adopt it because they have a trust in the person who is doing the blogging. And this is a major debate in policy making between the traditionalists and the sort of new generation of people who are influencing policy. And I think it is something to think about in terms of public policy making.
Thank you. I want to thank both our speakers, and it also falls to me, of course, to thank the people who made this program possible. From the German-American Institute, Kathleen Röber, Angelika Cossio, and Leonie Gisildas. From Stuttgart, Fabian Flor, from the American Spaces Program. From my chair, of course, Barbara Hefner, our secretary. And then we also have to thank Herr Hauptmann, from the Informatik-Lehrstuhl Bodendorf, who arranged the technology and made it possible that our program was seen on the web all over the world. And also thank you, and I hope you're going to come back to some of our other lectures, including the ones which is up there. And I all wish you a very nice evening. I think there's still time for you to go to the beer garden and drink non-GMO beer. Thank you very much. Fermentierungsstoffe natürlich.